My name is Robert Sendry. I am the Program Director for K-12 Environmental Education at NEEF. Assisting today is my coworker, Allison Hannes. Hi, Allison.
Hello.
Today's webinar, Greening STEM in a Classroom Setting, is an encore presentation of a professional development workshop NEEF recently conducted for middle level educators in the Miami-Dade County Public Schools. Today's presenters, educators at the Frost Museum of Science, will walk viewers through the process of developing 3 Greening STEM Biodiversity Series activities. Viewers will walk away with a basic understanding of these in-person and virtual classroom-ready resources, which are available at neefusa.org. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Angela Colbert, the Knight VP of Education at Frost Science, and Daniella Orihuela, the Director of Educational Programs at Frost Science.
Hi, Robert. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
After the presentation, we will open things up for a Q&A if time permits. So please submit your questions in the Q&A feature, preferably not the chat. And let's go ahead and get started with our first segment. It's going to be a conversation about developing greening STEM activities for the classroom with Angela and Daniella. So as I said, recently, NEEF partnered with Frost Science to develop 3 greening STEM activities for use by Miami-Dade County teachers. And that process was a collaborative partnership. And we tried to give folks at Frost some guidance, but then cut them loose to develop something that would work specifically for their location in South Florida. So the first question today is simply, Angela, what were some of the things that your team at Frost took into consideration when developing these activities?
Thank you, Robert. And I'm so excited to be here today to talk to you and to talk to all of our wonderful attendees. So really, when we're trying to do something like this, we want to look at what are some key environmental issues that are really important to the South Florida community or wherever your local community is. And that kind of really leads what we're doing. We also wanted to, be able to highlight some of the efforts that are very important to our organization and keeping our mission going that align so well with NEEF. And that's what makes it such a great partnership, when you can find that kind of synergy and ability to align that's also going to be aligned with the standards, because that's one of the key most important things to developing these, is making sure that we're meeting standards that are very important to help teachers, right? We got to make it easier for teachers in order to do their jobs. That's the whole point. But we want to give the kids a unique experience, something that maybe they don't get to do all the time, or that's not a part of the curriculum usually for them. So those are some of the key factors we took into consideration. So for us, we picked native versus invasive species, because that's one of the biggest issues here, not only in South Florida, but Florida in general, and a growing issue worldwide. So it's something that we could really tell both a local story, but also had impact and would still be applicable on a national level. So that was the one we're going to highlight later today. And then the other 2 we looked at were pollination, because who doesn't love bees and butterflies, right? But it's also really important for what's going on in there's all these campaigns you have started to see about save the bees, and it's really important for students to understand why should I save the bees? What's so important about these pollinating insects? And then we wrapped it up with one that was really kind of more of our local flavor, which is all about lizards. And so we focused on the anoles, because those are just, for those of us that grew up down here, we see the green anoles no more and only see the brown anoles. So that was just something that's been, such a quick change, even in someone's own lifetime, that, 10, 20 years, it didn't take long in order to see that change. And so we also felt that that was a really interesting story to tell, that, these changes, they don't have to take hundreds of years. They can happen very quickly. And so it kind of reaching into those different components. And I don't know, Daniela, if you want to add anything to that.
I think you're pinpointing those themes really well. I think we need to note that like we started kind of like with this broad subject in the sense of we wanted to do insects, for example, and then from insects we started really trying to, and we really tried to dive into a couple of different stories to see, should we do bees? Should we do butterflies? Should we do something else? And ultimately, we decided that the story about pollinators was one of the most important ones within the sector of insects. And the same thing happened with reptiles. Oh, I'm sorry. I think, are you all having a hard time hearing me?
It seems like you're a little soft at the moment. Yes.
I'm sorry about that. Let me see if I can get a little bit closer. So within that, I think it was just naturally we were able to just through a lot of brainstorming and conversations about the subjects, eventually be able to develop these stories and then add our own local flavor into them.
Great. And I noticed when you provided the drafts and then we got to the final product that included were non-science content, like the history or economic importance of a species. So why is that important when we talk about biodiversity?
I think this is one of the key factors. In a lot of the different aspects that we do, the science of it is obviously very important for us. It's a huge story that we want to tell, but there's so much more to the story. And we want to relate to individuals on whatever things interest them. So the more different kind of subjects and ways you can integrate interests is really going to help create a lesson that kids are going to want to do and actually participate and then learn from as well, because something will resonate with them. But for biodiversity in particular, telling the history is extremely important, because if you don't know the background stories behind what happened, why it happened, and get kind of that base understanding, it can create a big issue later when you're just seeing a problem, but not really understanding the full scope of it and the full way that it came about. Because a lot of things, history repeats itself, right? So we need to know the history in order to try to, combat those changes. And then the economic value, I think, is always one that's really interesting because people don't often think about that side of it. So they hear about it, they want to save the animals, but they don't think about the economic impacts, which could be good. In some cases, they're beneficial, like bringing Florida oranges to grow here in Florida. Those are not native trees, but they've done very well here and they're a huge part of our economy now. So I think those impacts, are just another aspect to add to the story that can really add meaning to it, but can also create a broader tale for them and give them other opportunities and ways to kind of get engaged and get interested in the topic.
Definitely. I think we had to keep in mind that we were developing these activities for grades 6 through 8 primarily. And so trying to see if there's any other type of avenue that will spark that interest to eventually, get them the opportunity to dive into biodiversity, we were looking for it. So whether it be through the economic aspect or the cultural or history, hopefully there was something there that was able to kind of like grab their interest and be able to have them do the activity and be able to really reap the benefits from it.
Indeed. As educators, we know that things don't happen in a vacuum, that there's always context. And that's part of the greening STEM model, is to bring some of that context in. So using the environment as the context for STEM learning is just one example. In preparing these and developing these, what design adaptations did the Frost team make to accommodate the use of technology, so as to make these available for use virtually or in person?
That's a great question. So we've been having to be kind of more nimble this year than most, right? For all of us. So we've all had to adapt to this new way of learning, which is much more focused on virtual learning aspects. And with that, we've developed programs that we try to really brainstorm and think about ways that they could work as a group and kind of scale up for in person or individually at home. So a lot of the key adaptations we did was make sure it was supplies that either we provided, aka just like printouts that you had to make, or things that you could easily find in your house, and use those kinds of materials in these lessons in order to make it accessible, whether you were at home by yourself with limited resources or you were in a classroom. And so in that, we also wrote in different kind of adaptations into the lessons where certain aspects could definitely be done in a group, or they could be done individually as an individual project. Obviously, we all love teamwork. That's our favorite way to do these kinds of things, but this year has taught us that sometimes you got to do it a little differently. So we wanted to make sure all the resources were inclusive and had everything available to the teachers to make it as easy as possible to implement, whether they were fully virtual, they were a hybrid model, or completely back in person. Because the hope is that even after this year, they'll continue to use these lessons in the future for future grades that come in, and next school year and the school year after, when hopefully we are back in person one day for these kinds of lessons.
I think we're all looking forward to that day.
Yes.
Well, we've talked about the STEM activities that you developed, and without further ado, I think we should turn things over to Daniella to give us a tour of one of the activities, and then we'll bring everyone back at the end for a Q&A. So folks, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and any that we don't get to, if we run out of time, we will follow up with folks afterwards. But let's hear from Daniella about the native versus invasive species plants activity.
Perfect. Thank you, Robert. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to go over one of the 3 lessons that we developed in conjunction with NEEF. These lesson plans are available on the NEEF website for you to review, and I believe the link was also shared through the chat earlier. So let me give you a quick little overview, as Angela was mentioning earlier, about the 3 lessons that we developed. The very first one being the native versus invasive plants, which we'll go over today. We also have another one around promoting pollinators, so insects, an insects focus specifically on bees and butterflies, and then also reptiles. So we do a reptile survey with a special focus on anoles. So for those of you that do want to look at the lesson plans, this is a native versus invasive plants. It looks like this. It's green, and you can follow along with me. But if not, you can just also look at my screen, and I'll kind of take you through what is the breakdown of these lessons and what we were envisioning as we were developing them. And they look kind of like this, very pretty. So let's go first over, the lesson objectives for this. I've listed them here, so that way you can see, if you don't have the lesson plan in front of you, at least you're seeing what the text looks like for that. But pretty much we wanted to have this focus on plants, and from plants we started thinking about what are those themes that we want to focus on, and that would be natives versus invasives. In this lesson, students will be able to identify the different plant species and the possible consequences of invasive species to a particular area, specifically a particular area that they choose or is within their immediate environment. They'll also become familiarized with common biological surveying methods, so they're gaining a skill as they're going through this activity lesson. And of course, we want to be able to integrate different concepts and different fields into our lessons, always in terms of informal education and being very hands-on. So students will also be able to apply mathematics concepts to measure and analyze data. And if you have the opportunity to be able to look through all 3 lessons at some points, you'll see that all 3 lessons have a very similar theme through it of biodiversity, have a very similar structure, but ultimately every time the students are doing this lesson, they'll be gaining different skills that actually will complement each other at the end. So they can be standalone or they can work together, all three as a series. The lesson themes are introduction to biodiversity. So we are celebrating biodiversity and the importance of it within our environment. So this natural variation of this living organism, so which includes from plants, animals at all different kinds of levels, and how important it is and how it may be threatened due to different changing climates and situations and actions, both ones that we control and ones that we cannot control. But ultimately also we want to highlight how important it is to have this rich variety of different species and how everybody adds a little bit of a very special and important role within this ecosystem. So that is one of the big core themes across all the lessons, and then especially this one, the native versus non-natives versus invasive. So what is that? So this lesson talks about what are native species. So those species that are originally from that local area. Non-native, so species that may have been introduced to that area and are not from there, but are flourishing, but are not threatening the relationship between other species that are already in that area. And then invasive, so species that are not naturally from that particular area, may have been introduced through a variety of different methods, and are unfortunately either threatening or taking over what may have been the environment of another species, therefore ultimately affecting what that environment will be in the future. And so we see that a lot, unfortunately, especially in Florida, which is our next theme, Florida's Invasive Species Challenge. So we are here, our Frost Science is based in Miami, in downtown Miami, in Florida. And we do have a very wonderful opportunity to see a plethora, variety of different plants and animals and so forth, but are also cognizant that many of them may not have been naturally derived from here. Many are actually introduced because of our location, because of our climate. We have the opportunity to host a lot, but then also that could have possible consequences. So as we were researching this, it was very interesting that we were finding out statistics such as that over 1,400 species of non-native plants have been introduced to into Florida, and 11% have become established in the environment, and about 6% are considered invasive. And that 6% may seem like a very low number. It's actually around 79 species. And those types of invasive species they become very adaptable to this environment. They start to grow very aggressively, and then reproduce very, very quickly, which lets them, spread out and take over what would be the natural native species in that area. And that, as we were talking about earlier with Robert and Angela, has a lot of different consequences, not just to the biodiversity within that area, but actually also has an economic impact within Florida. So in Florida alone, it means that we spend around $500 million a year managing its invasive species problem. So just to be able to manage it, not to really successfully resolve it, but just to manage it, that's a lot of money and a lot of efforts and resources that go into this. The biological surveying method that we'll focus on for this lesson is called a Bioblitz. So this is, again, highlighting the scientists use a variety of different methods to gather data, and within that different types of methods, there is one called a Bioblitz, and it's a type of event that presents an opportunity for scientists and really anybody from the general public, which is why this is so cool to be able to involve anybody who wants to have an interest in this, to really work together to find, record, and identify different species within a particular area. This is actually a photo from some of our Frost Science team members doing some field surveying themselves. This is a very common common method used out there in the field to really get a big picture of what may be present in a particular area. And it's as one of those basic surveying methods, we felt that it was very important to introduce it early on. And it is something that anybody can do from their own home or also within a classroom by themselves or as a team setting. Again, making the lesson very flexible and adaptable to whatever the group may be coming from. And then the great thing about this is that you can do this with a very simple pen and paper kind of format, pencil paper, and or also translate this information over to some digital tools that are now available. We recommend a couple of digital applications such as Seek or LeafSnap in this particular focus because of plants, or any web platforms such as iNaturalist that make it a very helpful tool for participants to gather data and then ultimately to also share that data. So we want to highlight how important it is for scientists to work together. No man is an island. We want to make sure that everybody is gathering their information, but eventually being able to share it and contribute to science. And so through this way, students are able to really start that process early on and hopefully be able to become field scientists themselves later on. If you're taking a look at the lesson, you may also see that there is a section for key vocabulary. We highlighted a couple of those key terms that will be useful for all of our teachers and students to know. And we also have a story highlight. So along with in the science background, highlighting the different, not just economic and cultural and history and scientific information relating to the subject, we also decided that it was important to really make it very relatable. So therefore we decided to include a little section called a story highlight, and you'll see that across all the 3 lessons. For this one, we decided to talk about the Melaleuca tree. If you're not familiar with the Melaleuca tree, it's actually a species that's actually originally from Australia, and it was intentionally introduced to the Everglades in the 1930s. And this was done to actually naturally dry out the swampy landscapes in efforts to reduce the mosquito population. And also help with agricultural purposes. So this all seems like very well intentioned and with the purpose to be able to help both economic growth and just the environment, the habitable environment of the area. But however, over time, these trees did become invasive, means that they flourished and they thrived and took over that area and displaced the natural cypress trees and sawgrass that were originally there. And then this native wildlife was not adapted, and therefore, ultimately, this species has taken over and has altered the balance of that area that was naturally occurring. On a side note, also, Melaleuca trees are actually easily flammable, which can result in forest fires, and they're very hard to remove once they've been introduced to the area. So in this case, we are kind of pinpointing a very specific example to make it very relatable for students to understand what the natives versus invasives versus the non-natives challenge is at the moment. So let's go over the project overview because it's very important. This is a very project-based learning type of experience, which means that as we're looking at how to really grab that interest, especially for students grades 6 through 8, we want to really get them to feel invested in the project and to be able to participate, be hands-on, and have really like these dive deeper experiences if they choose to do so. And that's actually something that was very helpful and important as we were developing these lessons. We added towards the end of each lesson an optional extension, which means that if the student or the classroom or as a group wanted to really explore a little bit further, they had the opportunity to do so in the instructions on how to. Also being cognizant that not everybody has the same resources available at all times. So therefore, if for some reason you did not have the resources such as a digital platform to share your experience with, You didn't have to do it and didn't feel like you hadn't completed the project. Throughout this, students will engage in the mini Bioblitz, so they'll do their own mini Bioblitz, this biological survey of their local surroundings to determine the species richness and whether there are natives or invasive plants in their area. They will work on documenting this information and evaluate the possibility of invasive plant removal to improve the biodiversity of their area. And then based on this experience, they will share their findings with fellow classmates to try to identify similarities, differences, and patterns in the data collected. For all those teachers who are following along, I do want to pinpoint also that, as Angela mentioned early on, that there are some key ideas and next generation science standards highlighted throughout these lessons. So we do point them out very early on in the lesson for you to be able to see how these lessons are aligning with these next generation standards. And there's also additional standards highlighted, including some in mathematics, literacy, and so forth. So what are the materials that they may need? As mentioned, we want to make sure that these are easy and accessible to them, or something that they can find at home. So through our materials, we actually put different identification guides that are available freely online. And they're actually listed already in our additional resources, along with more resources. A measuring tape or ruler, so just a measuring tool for their surveying. A student field worksheet, which is actually part of the lesson plan and you'll find towards the end, starting on page 9, and a writing utensil. That's pretty much all you need for the activity. Now, the optional, especially for the optional extension, are all these materials listed here, and that's for the potential invasive plant removal action towards the optional extension. And this includes, of course, a disposable bag, a face cloth covering, fieldwork attire. We want to make sure that everybody is safe at all times, especially when they're on the field and out in potentially like areas with mosquitoes or out in the sun and so forth. Gloves, a small shovel or trowel, and then along with this, these different digital applications, smartphones, tablets, and or a computer with the camera, and Seek or Leaf Snap apps. The project procedure, it is actually pretty detailed in the lesson plan, so I'm not going to go through it step by step, but I did want to list it for all of you here in each, just so you can get a quick little overview. There is an introduction to native versus invasives, which we provide guiding questions to the teachers to be able to how to manage and lead the discussion on what that topic of the introduction of that topic. What a mini Bioblitz project is, so introducing that to the students. And then within that mini Bioblitz project, they will choose a sampling site. They're given key tips on how to choose a sampling site, the data collection, the data analysis that comes from it. So a lot of those math components in there. Adding that optional, whether they want to use a digital tool such as Seek or Leaf. And then ultimately making their own biodiversity action plan. So we want to make sure that as the students are going through these lessons, they feel like accomplished towards the end, that they can make a difference within whatever project that they're diving into. And of course, we want to make sure that anytime we are going through this, through a session like this, that there is a presentation and reflection that people can share. So then therefore they can learn from each other's experiences and ultimately take away some of those important messages. So I took a couple snapshots of what the data collection worksheet looks like. You'll see it towards page 9 of this lesson plan. Pretty much it is very straightforward. It'll ask for, the student's name. They get to name their site, whether it be my backyard or something else. The date, we want to really hone in to the students that it's very important to record all the specific data, so that way they can come back to it later. Description of the habitat type, and then they have a little bit more space to do that. So you'll see it'll look something like this. over here. And what I wanted to show you actually is that I decided to do the project myself. So I went out to my backyard and decided to do a little bit of like a sampling site. You'll see on the left-hand side what the area looked like. And then on the right-hand side, what the recording of that data looked like. So I decided to do a 4 feet by 4 feet plot. This is why the measuring tape is very useful for them to take those measurements and then to use a quadrant system to be able to visualize on paper what their site looks like for their recordings and observations. So I'm sorry ahead of time for my very poor artistic skills and chicken scratch on a couple of the numbers. But the idea is that you're getting like an aerial view of that particular area. So you see the tree on one side, just the pretty much dead palm leaves on another side, some flowers, some ferns, and so forth. So you're visualizing on paper what you're seeing in real life. And this may be done in at a school, in the school garden or backyard or a local park. So there is that flexibility to be able to choose a sampling site wherever they want to, even just a vacant lot with weeds and again, just plain dead palm leaves could work. The idea is for them to really see what is present within that particular area they choose. Hopefully they choose an area that is a little bit rich in terms of different varieties, because that makes the experience more fun. So the next part of the activity is definitely that data collection. So within the quadrants, within the big plot, you split your area into 4 quadrants, and then you start making your observations. So it may, and this is why the headers are notes and possible identification. We understand that they're not everybody's going to be able to pinpoint right away what it may be. We give you the tools, such as different websites that have a very large catalog for students to be able to look through and research and possibly identify. But sometimes it may be just very simple and say it's a fern, and from there, hopefully, eventually you'll be able to do a further identification. We note the frequency, so how often you're seeing this particular species that you're identifying and noting. And then we ask you to do a little bit of math and note the plant area, so length times the width, and the plant abundance, and provide the instructions and equation of how to do it. So again, apologies for chicken scratch, but be able to find the percentage within all of this of how much of a plant abundance there is for your particular observations. And then you finish with your biodiversity action plan. And these can be done in a variety of different ways. So in this case, I just wrote out what were my observations and what would be the proposal for this particular plot area that I was surveying. But I highly recommend it to all the teachers out there that you can get creative with this portion especially, so they can make it a PowerPoint presentation, they can make it a poster, they can write an essay about it. So whichever way you want to include this, and we all know we want to recognize that everybody has different learning styles and teaching styles, but the idea is to really summarize and evaluate based on your findings, based on your evaluation of your data, what would be the next steps. It's not just, you don't just finish by saying, okay, I turned in my percentages. It's more the evaluation, saying like, how can we take this as a further step? How can we do some action out of it? Allison, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I had a quick question from the audience that I wanted to jump in and ask you. Did you provide the materials for students to build their own frame for gathering data?
Oh, for the, you saw the picture at the very beginning. So those are actually done by teams out in the field that have those frames and have like that capability. But you can use string, you can use a ruler, you can use pens to be able to actually plot that particular area as you want to. So those materials, again, are just recommended. So ultimately is what you have available, because we want to we recognize that people may be at home wanting to do this activity. So if so, and you want to jump into it, it's just using the materials that you have available at that moment.
Thank you. And then one more question that's kind of relevant to the topic you're on right now is, how did you calculate frequency of plant species? By counting stems growing out of the ground or something else?
Pretty much. So it's just trying to see how many you see within that area. So I saw 10 daisies, and I saw 1 fern, and I saw 2 palm trees, let's say, and that would be the frequency within that area.
Great, thank you.
Of course. Perfect. So based from here, that is just, sorry for all the rambling, but the lesson plan in a nutshell. Again, there are a variety of different steps, hopefully to be able to complete, to provide a very complete project for these classrooms and these students. The optional extension. So again, all of these are added to these 3 lesson plans, is applying a biodiversity action plan. So you've created your biodiversity action plan, and then now the optional extension is to put it into action if you want to, and if you have the time and resources to do it. We also want to make sure that everybody is doing it safely. So if, for example, they are in their own backyard, of course, they should ask their parents. But if they want to go through an invasive plant removal process, the idea is to make sure that they obtain permission to remove the plants, even within, if you're at a local school or anything like that. We want to make sure that before we put anything into action, that we're doing it correctly and through the right avenues. If someone is unable to remove the invasive plants due to its size or locations, we do have a resources section to help them find an agency, local and national, that may be able to visit their home and help remove it for them, or be able to notify their local park, or whichever area they are currently surveying. There are some chemical methods that are sometimes required for specific plant removals. We do encourage everybody to research whatever species they're trying to remove beforehand to see what is the best method to remove that particular plant species. We ask that students need to consult with an adult or an expert to help supervise the handling of any chemicals, or ask them to handle the chemicals, ask the adult to handle the chemicals themselves, so everybody is safe at all times. And of course, the use of proper PPE is highly recommended. So long sleeves, long pants, closed-toe shoes, a hat if you're out in the sun, glasses or goggles to be able to protect your eyes at all times, gloves, all of that is highly encouraged if they do choose to put their biodiversity action plan into action. And here are a lot of the additional resources. As you can see, we tried to be very, very extensive. The top 2, the Florida Invasive Plant Species Mobile Field Guide and the Florida Native Plant Society Online Guide, are the 2 resources that we recommend under the materials section. And these are very, very useful guides for anybody who wants to go out there and identify some plant species. It's very extensive, provides photos, so then that way you're able to match it a little bit more accurately. But apart from that, we also recommend the Florida Wildflower Foundation, Exotic Pest Control Council, so as mentioned, avenues or agencies that they can consult with if they want to remove an invasive species from an area that they don't normally have permission from. And then there are 2 applications that we recommend, LeafSnap and Seek. These are actually very fun. They really help provide kind of like this setting in a little bit more of a game format, almost like a scavenger hunt, that you're able to identify the species, and it really promotes that sharing of material. Once you take some photos such as iNaturalist, you're able to kind of add it to a database, so that way others can benefit also to see what is the frequency of identification of a particular species within an area. Before I wrap up, I do want to note that in celebration for this week in Earth Day, we do have a live of Frost Science, which is kind of like our virtual webinars. at the museum, which will be about Everglades restoration and climate change. So kind of aligning in terms of like, what are these different challenges that our local South Florida community is encountering. So I did want to highlight that. And then other than that, I'd be happy to take any questions about the lesson plan or any other subjects.
Hello, we do
Hi.
have one excellent question, and that is, what advice would you give to educators looking to adapt the activities to their local circumstances?
So the great thing about this is as we were developing these, is that we really wanted to make it as flexible as possible for anybody who wanted to participate. So I'm not sure from what location the question is coming from, but depending on where you are, I would say I listed some resources specifically for Florida. If you wanted to research within another area, I would consult first like your local state agencies to see if they have any guides that will help as those resources, and then ultimately be able to if they're credible, supply those to your students to be able to do their own research within their area. Again, this activity is hopefully tailored enough so that way you can, a student can do it virtually from home in their own backyard. You can do it as a group setting with small groups of students in person at a local school, whichever way you choose, you have, whatever you have access to.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have something to add, Robert?
I do not at the moment, other than to say that often the State Department of Natural Resources would be one place that you could look for local relevant information on invasives in particular, as well as state parks and local Department of Parks and Rec would be other possibilities as well for adapting things to whatever your local circumstances are. So if you do have questions, now is a great time to submit them. We do have a few minutes left here. We're not out of time yet. So I'm going to circle back to Angela and Daniella. When we first presented back in February as part of the professional development workshop, we also suggested that educators check out and perhaps participate themselves, or suggest that their students and their families participate in a big upcoming Bioblitz called City Nature Challenge. And so I was wondering if you could take a minute to just share a little bit about that and what Frost is doing this year with the City Nature Challenge.
Absolutely. So City Nature Challenge is an initiative. It's actually international, where you get to compete with cities all over the world to try to be the best city at spotting wildlife. And so the idea behind it is to really get people excited about going out into nature and to show them that there's real interest and value no matter where you live, and you can find nature around you. So with that, it makes it a very cool project. It's every year, and different cities host. Now you can always create, if your city doesn't have one, you can either look at becoming a partner with the City Nature Challenge individuals that host it, or you can also create your own City Nature Challenge and join the international field if you're interested in that, if your city doesn't have one that's already getting hosted. So Frost Science actually partners with a few other organizations on this initiative. And I believe it's coming up around May 1st, right, Daniella?
April 30th through May 3rd.
Okay, April 30th, yeah. So with that, we let the teachers know that this exists. And so basically what it is it's kind of like a Bioblitz, in the sense of that you're going out, you're using the iNaturalist app in particular in order to actually try to classify what different animals that you see, and then experts come on and identify them. And so you get a point or a tag in your city if you spot something, because it uses your GPS location. And so basically whoever spots the most out of everyone will go ahead and be the winner that year and get bragging rights for a year. So it's a fun way to get people engaged, get people out into nature and get them talking.
Yes, they mentioned it. They call it a collaboration meets friendly competition for it. So it's actually a lot of fun. And what's great about it is that people of all ages and backgrounds can join and participate, and it really creates this full-on sharing network of seeing how many, whether it be animals or local plants that you spot within a particular area. And if you don't, even if you're not really familiar with the different types of species, different experts really start chiming in and being able to help you identify what those species may be.
And so we actually built it into the third lesson. So it's in our lizards lesson. So you can find more information about it there. And then I see Robert also very kindly shared information in the chat as well.
Definitely. And also, they understand that some people may not feel safe yet to be going out into different areas around, their local city. So even if anybody wants to participate from their backyard or a local park, they're highly encouraged to do so safely.
Yes, thank you. And this is something that you could do in preparation for using these STEM activities, perhaps later in the year or next academic year, or as a culminating event after you've done something with students. You could then suggest that they invite family members and participate in City Nature Challenge, which has grown phenomenally and is creating a wonderful database on biodiversity, so that we have a better understanding of not only what exists currently, but perhaps down the road, if things don't go so well, what we've lost. Because biodiversity is one of those issues where climate change is quite impactful, and there's quite a bit at risk. And so we really do want to encourage folks to become familiar with and have an appreciation for biodiversity. And perhaps that'll translate into planting more native plants. When you go down to the nursery, you can ask for native plants as opposed to something that's imported from elsewhere. And in Florida, I think there was a program a few years ago, xeriscaping, where folks were encouraged not to plant lawns, but to actually plant native species. Is that program still running? Do you know?
I don't know if it's still running. I remember hearing about it. They're definitely still encouraging planting of native species, in particular for people's gardens of pollinating, ones that support pollinating insects like butterflies in particular here in South Florida, because our butterfly population has gone down a lot due to human impacts. So I know that they're encouraging that, as well as a broader native plant kind of installation. Not everyone does it. It's just going to be the way of the world. But, I think those people that want to, and even some that weren't aware, it definitely helps with those kinds of initiatives.
Sure. And with Florida being such a large agricultural state, pollinators are so valuable that we need to do everything we can to support them, because they help support us in terms of our food supply. Well, I don't think we've had any questions come in, so it looks like we're going to wrap a few minutes early. If you do think of a question and want to submit it, please do. We can follow up later. Otherwise, I want to thank our guests, Angela and Daniella, and my helpers behind the scenes, Allison and Amy, and those of you across the country who took time to join us today. We hope you've learned a few things and are inspired to incorporate biodiversity activities into your toolkit of educational resources. You'll be able to find today's biodiversity activity and all of the other EE Week 2021 resources at neefusa.org. So until next year, thank you all and happy EE Week.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. And thank you for listening.
All right, thank you.